kind of you to introduce that way. It's great to be back. Pastor David asked me to speak on truth this morning, so I figured I'd start with a verse you all know. In John 14:6, Jesus says, I am one of the ways, one of the truths, and one possible life. If it feels good to you, do it, and then come to me. You know, Jesus didn't say that. In fact, you know there's at least 100 verses in the New Testament where it makes it clear that Jesus is the only way to get to God. The scripture seems to proclaim that truth matters. And yet we live in a world that increasingly says, well, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. The word of the year in 2016 was post-truth. And yet Jesus claimed to be the truth. Have you ever just stopped and wondered, why is truth really important? Why does truth even matter? The Apostle Paul certainly seemed to think that truth matters. In 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 10, it says, and with all the deception of, I just clicked through it. Oh my goodness. It said, there it is. And with all the deception of wickedness for those who perish, because they did not receive the love so as to be saved. Paul says people perish because they don't love truth. You ever thought about how much your life you based on what you think is true? When you woke up this morning, you made sure it's Sunday, you got the right day, made sure you had the right directions to church, make sure church starts at the right time. In fact, next week you better have truth, right? If you want to get that extra hour of sleep. Truth matters. Have you ever really thought about in your life why truth is important? I'll give you one big reason is this, because truth has consequences. If you get up in the morning, haven't had your coffee yet, and you reach for a bottle, you think it says Tylenol, but it says rat poison, consequences. I read a story about a young man who went flying through a stop sign because he didn't see it, believed he was safe, and T-boned somebody. Friends, truth has consequences. This is why Hosea the minor prophet says, my people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. If in your life you don't love truth, your family you don't love truth, if our nation continues to not love truth, we'll be destroyed. But there's another reason why truth matters so much. I'm actually going to ask you where you're at to close your eyes, and point the direction you think is north. Close your eyes and point the direction. Everyone's got to pick. Point the direction. Now, keep your hands pointed and open up your eyes. I won't point at them, but there's a couple in this realm literally pointing like this. Now, if you're trying to go on a journey and you want to head up to, say, Mexico or down to Mexico, you might head up towards Canada if you have it in reverse. Right? Why is truth important? Because truth is like a compass for life. You see, when you know what is true, you know what choice you should make, right? This is how truth operates. It guides us like a compass in the directions that we make. Some time ago, somebody I love in my family, I can't tell you who it is because I'd never want to embarrass the woman who birthed me. She got a new email account and decided to set it up herself. Well, my mom is one of those folks, God bless her, she's a baby boomer, where like on technology, literally she reads everything step by step. And one of the first instructions that came up on her computer screen while she was trying to set her computer said, close all the windows. My mom, my flesh and blood, got up from her chair and walked around the house and closed all the windows in the house. Now, my sister fell on the ground and cried and laughed for an hour when she discovered what happened and what my mother had done. Now, my mom's come a long way. She's like on Twitter and follows me on TikTok and uses Instagram. But at this time, anything technology made her uncomfortable. Now, you were chuckling because you know when a computer screen says, close all the windows, it doesn't mean the windows in your house, right? Because you know a computer has been designed by somebody very smart to function a certain way. And when we don't understand its design and purpose, what happens? Frustration, embarrassment, and we get upset. If you want to know the purpose of a computer, what do? You go to the instruction manual, discover its design, and then use it accordingly. You see, why is truth important? Because truth sets us free, right? Truth sets us free. Let me go back one here real fast. In John 8:32, it says, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. Lies bring slavery. Truth brings freedom. That's why, have you ever noticed the first thing we learn about God in the Bible is not that God is holy, not that God is love, not that God is just, but in the beginning, God, this is the participatory part of the program. In the beginning, God created. The first thing we're told about God is that God is a creator. Why? If something's created, there's a purpose for how it's supposed to function. See, we learn in the Bible, God is a creator. There's a purpose for language. There's a purpose for nations. There's a purpose for marriage, and there's a purpose for sex. It's when we know that truth and we orient our lives to that truth that we're set free. That's why I think one of the greatest lies this generation, Gen Z, in fact, all of us are confronted with, is to believe that freedom is doing whatever you want to do. If it feels good and as long as you decide it, that's freedom. Friends, that's not freedom. Freedom is having the capacity to do what is right. Freedom is orienting our lives around God's truth. God is the creator. We are actually only free when we say, God, you're the creator. We are not. I will orient my life to your truth. That's freedom. Do you see why truth matters? Because number one, truth has consequences. But number two, truth sets us free. Jesus is the truth. Satan is the father of lies. There's a third reason why truth matters. It's because believing is not enough. Nothing is true because you believe it. Look, I work with young people, and I'll often hear young people say things like, and not just young people, that may be true for you, but it's not true for me. Jesus may be your truth, but I have a different truth. You know how confused our culture is? And this is not a political statement, but during the Kavanaugh hearings, people kept saying, share your truth. And I remember listening and going, it's not your truth and my truth. We have our beliefs, but our beliefs don't make something true. Can you imagine if beliefs made something true? You know how many times I believed I was 6'8" and in the NBA? I'm only 6'6" on this stage. I believe there's $1 million in my wallet. Doesn't matter if there were. My great state of California would take most of it anyways. Nothing's true because we believe it, but because truth has consequences, and because truth brings freedom, we must discover and believe and live what is true. Now, what I haven't done is actually give us a definition of truth. We don't have time. If I could go around, I wonder how many of you could actually define what truth is. Now, this is important because sometimes having clear definitions helps us not be taken in by the lies of the world that we believe in. It brings clarity and it brings power. So I'm going to give you a simple definition I share with my high school students and I share at Biola where I teach. Truth is this. Basically, it's called the correspondence theory of truth. Sounds fancy, but it's simple. A statement is true if it matches up with reality. So if you describe the world a certain way and the world is the way you describe it, then your statement is true. So if I told you I actually drove here from Southern California, it only took me 16 hours. You know why? Because I drove in my new red Lamborghini. Yeah, you go walking outside and you see this, my statement just might be what? It might be true. If we walk outside and see this, my statement would be what? It'd be false. Why? Because I described it as red. In reality, it's yellow. If you walk outside and see this, which is what I really drive, my statement would be what? Why are you laughing at me? I gave this talk to a bunch of junior hires, and 8th grader goes, you drive a Ford. I was like, what do you drive? My statement would be false because it doesn't even be close to matching up. See, I actually have 3 kids, a high schooler, elementary, and junior higher in the same year. It's pretty exciting. And I've done this with my kids to help them understand truth. In our family, we love superheroes. And so I'll take an image like this. You have the word, and you have the object. If that's actually Wolverine, if that's actually Batman, and that's actually Spider-Man, if they correspond, it's truth. That's it. Truth is when is that smoke? No, I'm just kidding. What'd you do when I said that? You turned to look to see if there was actually smoke in the back. Since there wasn't, my statement was false. If there were, my statement would have been true. Now, in some ways, you're probably sitting here going, this is actually common sense, and you're right. We all use truth this way. It's inescapable. The Bible doesn't define truth this way, but it assumes such a view as truth. By the way, what's the 8th commandment? No, it's not, don't lie. I set you up. I was messing with you. 8th is don't kill. The 9th, I was actually watching the Colbert show, and the senator was like, we need the 10 commandments in the courtroom. We need the 10 commandments. And Colbert goes, can you tell me the 10 commandments? And he couldn't even list them. Drop the mic and just walk out. Actually, don't drop the mic. Take it with you. The 9th commandment is don't lie. What's a lie? To intentionally misrepresent the truth. So the Bible doesn't define truth this way, but it assumes it. Everybody lives their life as if this is truth. But here's the catch. When the topic shifts to moral values or to religion, people will change what they mean by truth. So if I were to ask you what's the best flavor of ice cream, what might you say? Just throw it out there. Chocolate, vanilla? That's it, all of them. That's a great answer. Let me just save you the time and tell you what the best flavor of ice cream is. Are you ready? It's chocolate peanut butter. Now, by show of hands, I can't see those of you in digital land. How many of you, by show of hands, would say that that is true? Chocolate peanut butter ice cream is the best flavor of ice cream. How many of you say that is not true? It's false. Let me see your hands. Okay, we find ourselves in a strange predicament. So the statement chocolate peanut butter ice cream is true can be true for me, but not true for you? And the answer is yes, because we're talking about something we call subjective. You see, subjective claims are preference claims about the individual. They're matters of feelings and preferences that can be true for you, but not true for me. The key word in subjective is subject. If the individual or person believes something, by definition, it's true for him or her. When you think of subjective claims, I want you to think of ice cream, because ice cream preference is a subjective issue. What if I said, chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes? Usually I get an amen. Clearly there's no Baptist here. Now that's a different kind of statement, isn't it? This is not now a preference claim from the subject. This is a claim about the real world, the object. You see, objective claims are facts of the external world we discover. Okay, so think about it this way. If I had a huge, say, cup of chocolate peanut butter ice cream, and I said this is delicious, that's not really about the ice cream. That's about my subjective experience of the ice cream. But if I said the ice cream is, say, 20 grams, that's a property of the ice cream, not my preference. Does that make sense? So when you think of objective claims, I want you to think of insulin, because insulin actually helps control diabetes. So here's my question. I'm going to ask you to participate here with me. I'm going to, in a moment, put some statements up on the screen. And I want you to shout out one of two things. If it's a subjective claim, I want you to shout out ice cream. If it's an objective claim, I'm going to ask you to shout out insulin. Okay, now I'm not asking if these claims are true or false. I'm simply asking what kind of claim are they? If it's a claim of the object, insulin, claim of the subject, ice cream. All right, let's give it a shot. Here we go. Coke tastes better than Pepsi. Okay, good, it's preference. Maybe you don't like Coke or Pepsi, but that is a subjective claim, okay? Diet Cola has fewer calories than regular Coke. Insulin, okay, good. Now it's not about the subject. It's about a property of the soda or diet soda it inherently contains, okay? Here we go. George Washington was the first president of the United States. Insulin, okay, good. This is about the object, namely the first president. Now, this deals in what discipline? It's not science, it's history, and it happens to be true. So you can't see it like you could allegedly see smoke in the back, but there's still a mind-independent truth about this claim. So you're right, it's an insulin claim. Are you ready? Ice cream or insulin? Action movies are more enjoyable than romances. Ice cream, that's a preference claim, right? Now, some of you would want to die on this hill. 2 decades of marriage behind here, don't die on that hill, fellas. Ice cream or insulin? Sean McDowell can bench press 300 pounds. I am not feeling the love. I've been here twice. No. Now, there were some of both here. Now, notice something. Do you know whether or not I can bench press 300 pounds? No, you don't. You might think you know, but you don't. Do you have to know the answer of whether it's true or false to know if this is an ice cream or insulin claim? And the answer is no. Why? There is a truth about this claim, isn't there? And its truth status doesn't depend upon what you believe about it. Either it's true or it's false. So this is an insulin objective claim. Now we could test it. I could cut off my sleeves, bring up some 45s and see if I could bench press it or not. Everybody know what the answer is? I used to care before I turned 40. Now I just want to stay alive and stay healthy. But can you see how, for example, if I said there's 50 quadrillion, zillion atoms in the universe, we'll never be able to test that. But either that claim is true or that claim is false. It's a claim about the objective real world, not just our feelings and preferences. How about this one, ice cream or insulin? Earth is the center of the solar system. Insulin, okay, good. Now this is not a historical claim. This is what? A scientific claim that also happens to be false. So if I said 2 + 2 = 5, that's an insulin claim that's false. If I said George Washington was the second president of the United States, that's an insulin claim, but it's false. So far you've told me that historical claims and scientific claims are like insulin that deal with the objective world. You ready? Ice cream or insulin, abortion is wrong. How many say ice cream? Show hands. How many say insulin? How many say after the 2016 election, I will never vote on anything ever again? No, I'm kidding. This is not a historical claim, is it? This is not a scientific claim. This is a moral claim. Are moral claims like ice cream that can be true for you but not true for me? Or are they like insulin that deals with the objective, real world? Do you see the question? Not long ago, I was in a conversation with a fellow, and he goes, look, if you don't like abortion, don't have one. I said, sorry to point out the obvious, but I can't. Look, if you notice my sarcasm coming through, I don't think you can be a teacher without having some sarcasm. I actually think sarcasm is the 6th love language. My wife disagrees, but, we're working on it. I said, look, obviously I can't have one. Notice what his thinking was. If you don't like abortion, if you don't prefer it, don't have one. If you don't like chicken, get the fish. If you don't like coffee, get tea. As if moral questions are matters of preferences. So in this situation, my mentor trained me to ask a question. I looked back to him, I said, are you against slavery? And he looked at me like I was stupid. He said, of course I am. I said, then if you don't like slavery, don't own a slave. Let me ask you something. Are we against slavery because we don't like it? The answer's no. We're against slavery because it's objectively wrong to enslave and mistreat and own a human being based on something secondary like skin color. Can you imagine if all moral claims were like ice cream? Could you ever judge anyone for doing anything wrong? No. You couldn't. Any more than I can say, you like chocolate, you're wrong, it's vanilla. It's preference. There's no right answer. If morality's like ice cream, it's preference, there's no right answer, which means the Me Too movement is just a matter of preference, but it's not actually wrong to take advantage of somebody. It would mean that racism isn't wrong. It would mean that bigotry and hypocrisy isn't wrong. It would actually mean that the government of Syria, which is probably responsible for the deaths of 500,000 people to secure its power, is not wrong. If morality is like ice cream. But the reality is, we know it's not, don't we? You want to know what someone believes about morality? It's not by what they say, but what? Actually, it's not by what they do. I set you up again. It's not by what they say, it's not by what they do, but are you ready? But by how they want to be treated. Everybody wants to be treated as if promise-keeping and fairness are objective features of the world. I tell my students, I say, if someone tells you there's no such thing as a real right and wrong, cut in front of them in line. I was sharing this in another country, and they said, actually, in our country, it's not wrong to cut in line. If you are older, the honorable person is supposed to come to the front. I said, oh, that's interesting. So if you're younger and you cut to the front in front of someone older, is that wrong? They said, yes. I said, that's my point. You might differ how you express it, but there is a right and a wrong and a such a thing as fairness that we all know and believe that transcends culture. In fact, you want to know, you know what someone believes about morality, not by their actions, but by their reactions. Look, Romans chapter 2. It says even people without the law still know it and sometimes follow it. Why? Because it's written on their hearts. Even atheists who don't believe in a universal God who grounds right and wrong are still made in the image of the God they reject and still live in God's world. We know there's a right and wrong. It's written on our hearts. I teach full-time at Biola University and graduate classes, and I teach a high school class 3 mornings a week where my kids go to school, or my wife teaches. It's at a private school. And a few years ago, some of my high school students came into me and they said, hey, Dr. McDowell, at this public school, which is a mile or 2 down the road in my city, the students created this free-thinking atheist club. And they all got together and did this event, and 100 people showed up to learn about like atheism and skepticism. And they're like, we should do something about it. I was like, what do you guys want to do? They said, we came up with this idea that in our church, we would host a public debate between 3 free-thinking atheist students and 3 of my students who are Christians. It was packed, and our church is not as big as this. It probably had 400 people, but there were people standing along the walls to watch high school students debate the big questions of life. It is seriously one of the coolest things I've ever done as a teacher. Well, we debated historical Jesus, evolution, intelligent design, and morality. So one of my students, I had trained her. She went up to the front. When it was her time to speak, she said, look, we know there's a right and wrong. We live our lives as if there's a moral law. That's because there's a moral law giver. Objective right and wrong points towards God. One of their students went to the front and said there is no objective right and wrong. It's all preference, like ice cream preference. You have your values, live consistently. I have mine, therefore there's no evidence for God. And he sits down. Then a few minutes later, it was time for the closing speeches of the debate, where you're supposed to sum up why you won the debate, the arguments you made, and why your opponent failed to answer it. Well, this student from the Skeptical Club decided to do something different. Keep in mind, he had just argued that there's no such thing as objective right and wrong. It's all preference. Walked up in front of our church, knew it was at least a majority Christians, and he started pointing at Christians. He said, you're bigots, you're hateful, you're intolerant, you're homophobic, shame on you. Repeats it for 3 minutes and then sits down. Do you see the irony? There's no objective moral code, but you bigoted, hateful Christians have violated every single objective moral code, and you should have known differently. And he didn't even see it. You see, his worldview said there's no such thing as objective right and wrong because he denied God, but he couldn't help himself from making moral judgments because we live in a moral universe and he is in fact made in God's image. Now, unfortunately, my students didn't see it until after the debate. I was sitting there, I was the moderator. I was so tempted to point it out to him, but I couldn't. You know why? Because even though they said there's no objective moral code, they would have told me that I was being unfair. Isn't that ironic? Friends, we know there's a right and we know there's a wrong. Now, this question I asked about abortion, what actually is the heart of the question on this? So I'd imagine that those of you here in person, you go home and you decide that you're gonna do the dishes. Okay, now for some of you, this takes a lot of imagination. And you're doing the dishes, and your younger brother or sister or younger kid comes in behind you and says, Mommy, Daddy, can I kill this? Before you say yes or no, what question would you ask? What is it? Turn around, it's a cockroach? You'd be like, yes, hurry up. Turn around, it's a kitten? You'd be like, no, that's messed up, that's cute. We don't treat animals that way. Turn around, it's like, yeah, I pulled this infant out of a carriage down the street. Can I kill this? You'd be like, whoa, no. And even though you're like 4 or 5, you need counseling. What's the difference in how we treat a cockroach or an infant or a cat? The difference is what it is. The question with abortion is, what is the unborn? If it's not a member of the human race, then it has no human rights. If it is a human being, it has human rights, which includes the right to life. There is an objective status of the unborn that our opinions don't change. Either it's human or it's not. We can be right on this issue, we can be wrong on this issue. Now, friends, let me say very quickly, because I realize this is a sensitive subject. Abortion is not the unforgivable sin. Please know that. if you have experience in any capacity with this, God loves you and wants you to experience the freedom of his unrelenting love and mercy and grace and forgiveness. Ice cream or insulin? Come back with me. Jesus was a carpenter. Insulin. Jesus died on the cross in AD 30. Some argue 29, some argue 33, but it's an insulin claim. How about this one? Jesus rose from the grave, proving he is God. Insulin, okay, good. Now, Jesus rising or not is a historical claim. Him being God is now a theological claim, isn't it? Let's be very clear on something. Nobody dies and goes to hell just for not believing in Jesus. You know that, right? Nobody dies and goes to hell just for not believing in Jesus. The Bible says people die and go to a horrible place called hell because of a moral rebellion against their Creator, because of a moral virus we call sin. And to say that Buddha or Krishna or Mohammed or any other religious figure can forgive your sins is like saying chocolate peanut butter ice cream controls diabetes. It doesn't work in the objective, real world. You know why Jesus is the only way? It's because Jesus is the only one who fixed the problem. Friends, if your car's out of gas, it doesn't do any good to rotate the tires or get new spark plugs. You got to identify the problem and you got to fix it. The problem is not unequal distribution of wealth. The problem is not that we forgot we're God like New Age teaches. The problem is something called sin, that God is holy in his character and we have rebelled against this God and separated us from him. And Jesus is the God-man who lived a perfect life and is the only one who fixed the problem. Jesus is not ice cream, he's insulin. That's why Paul says, if Christ has not been raised, your faith is worthless. Your faith is worthless if Christ has not been raised. In other words, if you're there at the cross, you could have reached out and touched the cross and got a splinter on your hand. You could have felt the trickle of warm blood coming down. If you were at the tomb, you could have seen a stone rolled away, stepped inside, smelled the scent of a musty tomb, and seen the linen cloth of Jesus laying there. Friends, either Jesus is God or he's not. Either Christianity is true or it's not. And either you believe it or you don't. But Christianity is not the kind of system that can be true for you, but not true for me. It's true or it's false. You believe it or you don't. Jesus didn't say, I'm one of the ways, one of the truths, and one possible life. He said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one gets to the Father but by me. And that, my friends, is the truth. Now, one thing I don't have time to do is answer the next question. How do we actually know that Christianity is true? Well, one way we know this is just by reading the scriptures and seeing the power of God through the scriptures themselves. The story is powerful and it resonates with our hearts. The other way is to actually look at the evidence. The evidence actually shows that Christianity is true. My father, some of you might recognize the name Josh McDowell. He set out to disprove Christianity years ago to show that it was false. Was surprised by the evidence and wrote this book called Evidence That Demands a Verdict because he realized Christianity is true. You might recognize this. Well, 3 years ago, we worked together and we actually updated the book. And I asked my dad, I'm like, you've been doing this 5 decades. How does the evidence for Christianity compare now to when you started this half a century ago? He goes, son, there's a tsunami of evidence. We have nothing to be afraid of by challenges to our faith. Christianity is true, but are we ready with an answer is the question. If it helps you, I mean, it's a massive book. You could either work out with it or read it, either one. It's actually the evidence for Christianity is laid out. And then second, a book I wrote with a friend of mine, how do we actually do this? How do we teach truth to the next generation in light of how Gen Z thinks? Friends, we have bigger challenges as a church, and COVID is just one of them in reaching a new generation. It must be all hands on deck. Thank you for having me. If they're helpful, I hope these resources will help you out. I'm going to sneak to the back. I love to pound it, not shake a hand. You know the drill, or sign a book. But it is truly a privilege to be here. My thanks to you, and my thanks to Pastor David. God bless.
Thanks for watching this week's message. Here at Church on the Rock, our purpose is to help you know God better. And one of those ways is through Growth Track. We have a 4-step process online that you can take anytime, or maybe consider joining us in person. But to take your next step and to find out all the incredible things we have to offer here at Church on the Rock, I encourage you to go over to cotr.org/online, or you can email us at online@cotr.org. And never forget, God is for you.